Okay. Good morning, and we bring a new Masechta Sukkah on Beis Amud. Sukkah sheik vayel ma'al mesem amma psula. A sukkah which is higher than 20 amos, which is around 40 feet, is going to be pasul. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir, that's the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yehuda says that even if it's over 20 amos, it's going to be kosher. And also, it also invalidates a sukkah if it's less than 10 tefachim. It's lower. It does not reach the height of 10 tefachim. And if a sukkah is required to have 3 walls, and has less than 3 walls, it is not going to be a valid sukkah. And if there's more sunlight than shade, psula, it is going to be considered invalid. So machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. Rabbanan hold that a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 amos, and the Rabbi Yehuda says it could be higher than 20 amos. Then we finish off saying that a sukkah has to be at least 10 tefachim high. So according to the Rabbanan, it has to be between 10 tefachim and 20 amos, and it has to have 3 walls, and it has to have more shade than sun. Tanan Hassam, we learned in a Gemara in Eruvin. Mavoi was a sort of like a courtyard. It was an alley that was closed off on 3 sides, but the third side was totally open to the Rosh Hashanah, to the public domain. And even though that biblically it was fine, you're able to carry in that area because it was considered its own domain, but the Rabbanan said that you have to you're not allowed to carry in there unless you create an Eruv, you close off the 4th side. Now, how do you go and close off the 4th side? The mavishu gavayim esrim amma yimat. If you have that rod that's running across that open space to create the eruv on the 4th side of the mavi, which is open to the public domain, if it's over 40 amos, the Mishnah says that you have to lower it. So we see from here that it has to be that when the mavoi has to be lower than 20 amos, like the Rabbanan in our Mishnah.
Mavoi again? Define.
A mavoi was that open space that has 3 walls, but the 4th side's open. So you create a beam going across the top to create a eruv, and that has to be lower than 20 amos.
Okay.
Now that's the Rabbanan. That's in sync with our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 amos, and an eruv has to be lower than 20 amos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it can't be higher than 20 amos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda is also in sync with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda writes that one does not have to go ahead and it could be higher than 20 amos. Ma'ishna gabi sukkah de tani psula, or ma'ishna gabi movi de tani tekamta. So, but we do have a question. Why in our Mishnah did we say that it's possible why did our Mishnah say that it's possible if you have a sukkah which is higher than 20 amos? But by Eruvin, it didn't say that's possible. It gave a fix. It said to lower it. So why didn't our Mishnah also say if you have a sukkah, according to Rabbanan, if a sukkah higher than 20 amos, you should lower it down lower than 20. It just says it's possible. And by the Eruv, it said that you could give it a fix. So why the difference between the two? So the answer is, one answer, sukkah daraisa and tani psula. A sukkah which is biblically usur, it's forbidden biblically. We have to write pasul because over there we could say that it's invalid. It's not like Rashi writes, lo nasas k'torah v'kalacha. It's not done like the Torah and the halacha. Mavi derabanan tani tekanta. However, mavi, which is only derabanan, because biblically you could carry there because it's its own domain, but the rabbis were afraid that you might walk out into the public domain because there's no barrier. So therefore, the rabbis require you to create an eruv. There's only rabbinic. So in this rabbinic, you can't really say it's invalid. You can't say you're not allowed to carry in that area. It's totally really permitted. So therefore, we wrote a fix. That's one answer. We based him another answer is midaraisa nami tani tekanta. Midaraisa also really they could have written the fix. There's no reason why they couldn't write the fix. Miu sukkah the nafish milsa pasuk betani pesula. That since by the sukkah where we had many different cases. If you look in our Mishnah, we have up to four different types of way to invalidate a sukkah. So over there, we're not going to go start in our Mishnah. We're not going to start throwing in writing all the answers how to fix it up. It's going to be too lengthy. So just right there invalid. However, however, by the mavu, which I think is 2, there are 2 invalid cases. So over there, the Gemara is willing to go out of its way to write the fix. Okay. So the Gemara is going to ask, how do we know that, according to Rabbanan, how do you know the issue with the 20 amos is really an issue? How do you know that 20 amos, that a sukkah, or rather, what is the reason a sukkah, which is 20 amos high, is invalid? Amarava, Damarkra, Lamanyodu Darisechem Ki Besukkah Shaftes B'nai Israel. We have the famous pasuk. One of the reasons why we sit in the sukkah, the reason why we sit in the sukkah is Manyodu Darisechem, in order that in the future, that the generations to know that Kadosh Baruch Hu saved the Jewish nation in the desert with sukkahs. Until 20 amos, someone could figure, when you look, he knows that he's in a sukkah. So once it's over 20 amos, when you're looking, it's very hard. Your eye doesn't really go to the top. Your eyes are not gonna lead you to the top and realize there's schach, because that's the ikar part. That is the main part of the sukkah. Otherwise, you wouldn't know you're in a sukkah. So up to 20 amos, you're going to be cognitively aware that you're in a sukkah. Less than 20 amos, one is not going to be aware that he's in a sukkah, and therefore you're not being mekayim, you're not fulfilling the pasuk of being aware and remembering that you're in a sukkah, to remember that Kadosh Baruch Hu took us out of Mitzrayim and help us survive in a sukkah. So that's one answer. Second answer, Rav Zera. We have another pasuk, the sukkah til itself, Yomi mechayri. The pasuk writes that a sukkah is supposed to be there to help to give you shade. Ad esrim ama adamesha b'tzal sukkah. So up until 20 amos, a person actually is able to sit and the shade that he receives from the shade that he's receiving in the sukkah is from the actual schach on the top. However, once you reach 20 amos, you're no longer sitting in the shade. The schach is not really the one providing the shade from the sun. It's rather the walls. You're sitting in the shadow of the walls. Therefore, the pasuk clearly says that a sukkah is meant for shade. Over here, it's not the schach that's giving the shade. And if it's over 20 amos, you're sitting in the shade of the walls. Okay, that's the second answer. Now, on that we have a question. So Amalei Abaya. So Abaya has a question. Someone makes a sukkah in Asher's Kanayim. Asher's Kanayim was a valley with two high mountains above it. And it was always in shade from the mountains. So you had two mountains, and the mountains always provided shade to this little valley, this deep valley. How can I have a sukkah? So you can never build a sukkah in there, because you have a sukkah with schach, but the issue is going to be that you're going to have schach, but the schach isn't going to be giving you the shade. Even if you have a regular sukkah, which is not 20 amos, it's going to be the two mountains on the side that's giving you the shade. So therefore, you can't be mekayim the mitzvah of a sukkah, according to this reason. If the reason you can't, 20 amos is a problem, because you're receiving the shade not from the schach, rather from the walls. If that's the reason I can't have amos 20 amos high. So if you were in between the twin towers and had a little sukkah between them, I guarantee you the shade wasn't coming from your schach, it was coming from the twin towers. That was blocking out the sun. But the same thing with these two mountains. So yes, but over there, that's just a technicality. You remove the walls, you take away the twin towers, which I guess did happen. If you remove the walls, then you're going to be sitting in the shade of the actual sukkah. However, over here, if you remove the walls of the sukkah, you're not going to be sitting in the shade of the sukkah. You're sitting in nothing because it collapsed on your head. So therefore, the walls is just a technicality. The mountains are a technicality. Remove it, you still got the shade. Then you have the shade. But in this case, you cannot remove the walls, and therefore you'll permanently be sitting in. Due to the walls, the shade will be from the walls and not from the schach. Now we're going to give a third reason or a third source why a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 hours. Rava Amar Mehacha. The sukkah is Teishu Shivas Yamim. In sukkahs we live. In Vayikra it says the sukkah is Teishu Shivas Yamim. In Amar it says because the Torah states the reason why we fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah is because I'll take that. The Torah commands us the sukkah is Teishu Shivas Yamim. You should sit in a sukkah for 7 days. Amar Torah Kol Shivas Yamim Tzei Midir Keva Tzei Midiras Arai. The Torah specifically writes only 7 days. So if you live in a building for 7 days, that is called a temporary dwelling. So the Torah is informing us you should leave your permanent dwelling, go into a temporary dwelling. Ad Esrim Ama Adam Oisid Diras Diras Arai. A person, it's normal for a person to build a type of temporary dwelling until it is a 20 amos high structure could be considered a temporary dwelling. Once you're hitting more than 20 amos, structurally, that's going to be required to make it a much more permanent structure. Therefore, if it's more than 20 amos, we cannot view it as you're not fulfilling the pasuk of living and dwelling in a temporary dwelling. Abaya, so Abaya again has a question, just like I had a question before. So Abaya had a good question. If you go ahead and you build walls of iron, then how could one go ahead? Are you able to build a sukkah there? Are you able to put schach on top? Is that permitted? Interestingly, I mean, they don't have it here. No one really has it. When I go up in Montreal, it's extremely cold. So a lot of people in their kitchen, they have skylights. They open the skylights, put schach up there, they make sure it's close enough to the walls. Bingo, there's their sukkah. And they, it's a lot of people have it. It's very normal to have that. Or wherever, some on the deck, or they build a sunroom in the deck, and that's what they do. So that's a deer right. There's nothing. It's permanent. It's part of your house. Is that permitted? According to this, it shouldn't be permitted because you have to actually go out into a temporary dwelling. No, this is what the pasuk meant to say. This is what we meant to say. So the answer is no. Yes, you don't. As long as you fulfill you're allowed to sit in a sukkah made out of concrete. As long as you fulfill all the obligations when it comes to the measurements and how close it is to the wall. But then according but the Torah just said you have to be temporary. And if you say the reason that 20 amos, you can't be more than 20 amos because it's not that's already considered a permanent dwelling. That means you really have to go out into a temporary dwelling. So I'm like, right. Usually, overall, until 20 amos, when someone's building a structure up to 20 amos, that is usually a diras. That's usually a temporary dwelling. So therefore, any type of dwelling, even if it's permanent, but up until 20 amos, it still falls under the category of temporary, because usually under 20 amos is temporary. However, once you hit more than 20 amos, you have to really start, due to its height, the structure needs a proper foundation. It has to be permanent. Therefore, even if you go ahead and you make a wooden structure that's not going to last more than 7 days, that's higher than 20 amos, still, since usually more than 20 amos is a type of structure which is permanent, then that is why the Rabbanan forbid it. So we had 3 reasons why the rabbi said that a structure higher than 20 amos is going to be not allowed. One is because you can't see the schach. Number 2 is because the shade is coming from the shade is more coming from the walls than the ceiling. And the last is because that is a permanent dwelling. Now we're going to turn on to 2B. Now we're going to go through all the different. We're going. So we just went through the 3 reasons, and we're going to see if they can agree with each other in any way. Rabba that said that the reason is because the schach and the eyesight your eyes don't really follow the wall higher than 20 amos. You're not going to go. You're not going to know that you're in a sukkah. Ahu yedias l'dayrisi. They the other 2 never would agree to Rava because he's going on a pasuk of sorry, give me a second. Yeah, I'll take that. The other 2, why didn't the other 2 agree with Rabba? The other 2 that brought their reasons of either because of the shade or because of permanent dwelling. Why didn't they agree with Rabba that said the reason is because the eyes don't follow up until the top? Because he brought a pasuk, and the verse was talking about you should know the way Rabba understood that pasuk, that you have to know that you are sitting in a sukkah for all this time. Rabba understood that meant to say you have to be cognitively aware that you're sitting in a sukkah, and higher than 20 amos you're not going to be able to see the schach. They learned no, it doesn't mean that you really have to know. The verse wasn't telling you that when you're sitting in a sukkah you have to be aware of the schach on top of your head. That was talking about yedili derisi. That is talking about that. The Torah was just stating that for our eternity of of the Jewish nation every single year, they should know, they should just remember that they were that Kadosh Baruch Hu saved them and put them in the sukkah. It's not that while you're in a sukkah you should know. It's rather just we have to know and throughout our existence that Hashem saved us in the sukkah. Not that we have to be sitting in the sukkah and remember. So that's why the other two did not agree with Rabbah. Reb Zera, who wrote their reasons because of the shade, and higher than 20 amis, you don't get the shade of the roof, you get the shade of the walls. Na'ami layam amri, they also would not agree with him. So how do they argue with him? That is because he brought a pasuk. He brought a pasuk saying that a sukkah is connected with shade. That is the wrong pasuk. It's not talking about sukkah. It's talking about the future when Mashiach comes. Therefore, that's why the other two did not agree with Reb Zera. Reb Zera, so now we have a question. Reb Zera came lema krav chopa tiel etzel yamin. So, and according to Reb Zera, it said the reason is because of tzel. Why do you have a pasuk? Now we have a question of Zera. That a canopy should be for shade. So according to we have a so the question is, what's Rav Zera going to do with this? Rav Zera has a problem because we have a question of Rav Zera. Rav Zera said you bring the wrong verse. Your verse is really for Mashiach, not for the future, not for now. So Rav Zera, what did he say? So Rav Zera would answer you. Then the Torah should write a canopy should be for tzel yamim, and if something to do with the future. But why do you say anything about a sukkah? The Torah doesn't have to write a sukkah. So Shema Mina Tarki. So we learn two things. We learn about the days of Mashiach, and we learn about today about when we actually sit in a sukkah has to be for tzel. Okay. And the reason why they didn't agree with and the reason why they didn't agree with Rava is also because of the question of Abaya. Abaya had the question of the permanent structure. Okay. So now we're going to continue. We're going to bring down 3 times a saying in the name of Rav, each one by another student. We're going to try to figure out, and we'll try to plug that into our Mishnah. Come on, also how the Amar Ravishaya Amar Rav Machlekes Mishain defanis nigis naschach. The whole machlekes, so according to this understanding in the name of Rav, the whole machlekes in the Mishnah that it could be higher than 20, or it can't be higher than 20. It's only talking about when the walls do not reach the ceiling, where there's a gap between the walls and the actual schach. That's when the Rabbanan say you can't have 20 amos high. And that's when Rabbi Huda says it's not a problem. But if the walls actually reach, but if the walls actually reach the schach, even higher than 20, everyone holds that would be kosher. So according to Rabbi Shaya, according to this saying in the name of Rav, everyone agrees that if the schach hits the walls, if they touch each other, it could be higher than 20. Come on, Karava, that's obviously going like Rava. Rava said the problem is the eyesight. Okay, so according to this, must be Rav was learning the machlekes in the Mishnah is going like Rabbah, and Rabbah was the one that said the reason because the eyesight doesn't reach. So according to him, if there's a gap, now you're running into the problem because the eyes are going to go up, and then it's going to hit. It's going to get stopped because there's a gap. But if it goes all the way to the top, then eventually you'll even if it's higher than 20 amis, your eyes will follow. If it's lower than 20 amis, then your eyes will even jump the gap and go to the sukkah. Behind amis, that is the first one. Come on, also Hadam Rav Huna Amar Rav. Now we have a second saying of Rav Huna, and then now it's a student Rav Huna named Rav. That's the whole machlekes is only when there's 4 amis by 4 amis. When you don't have 4 by 4, if you don't have 4 by 4, then we have the problem of 20. Even so, the machlekes in the Mishnah is everyone agrees that if it's more than 4 by 4, then you get higher than 20. Come on, who's that like? Who's that like? Reb Zera. That would be like Reb Zera, who said the problem is the shade. If it's exactly 4 by 4, then we're going to say the walls are if the walls are up to higher than 20, we're saying you'll be sitting in the shade of the sukkah. However, if the walls, if you're wider than 4 by 4, then we'll say the walls, even if they're 20 amis high, we will say that the shade, since it's wider, it's wider than 4 by 4. We'll say at that point you will be getting shade from the walls, but there's enough shade from the schach to take care of the problem. So that would be according to this one, Rav Huna Amarav is going like Rav Zera. Kaman also Hadam Rav Chanan bar Rabba Amar Rab. Now we have a third one. Rabba bar Chanan bar Rabba and the name of Rab. The machlekes is only when it does not it's not machzakes. It doesn't hold. Kidei Reish Rubi Shulchanai. There's halacha that the you have to be the sukkah has to hold or be able to contain your head and most of your body. So when you're eating the sukkah, you have to be your head has to be in the sukkah and most in the majority of your body. However, the sukkah is bigger and able to go ahead and accommodate more than your head and right of your body. Then it's not a problem. The Rabbanan would agree if it's big enough, if it's bigger than the size of sukkah, then if it's bigger than that size of holding the head and most of the body, then it's not a problem, and there's no machlekes. But even the Rabbanan would agree that it could be higher than 20 hours. Like a chad, it's not like any of them. This doesn't agree like any of them. It did not. It won't fit into any of the three ways that we learned. Now, why not? So over there at that point, it's nothing. We can work. It's nothing to do with that. That size. Nothing to do with looking up. It's not going to be because of sale necessarily. Because why are we putting? If it's the size of the person's body is not going to affect the fact if the shade is from the walls or from the ceiling. And also, it's nothing to do with mechisas, nothing to do with something permanent or not. So this saying of Rav, we can't really attribute to the machlekes of any of them, of the three ways that we learned on the previous summer. Now, we're going to go and to try to figure out. We just went through three different sayings in the name of Rav, and according to that, each of them there's three different ways to understand the machlekes in our Mishnah. Now, the saying of Rabbi Shaya that he said the reason was because when there's the whole machlekes is only the whole argument in the Mishnah is only when there's a gap. Pligi ad Rav Huna, Rav Chanan bar Rabba. That is a machlekes. He's arguing on Rabba bar Chana and Rav Chanan bar Rabba because those two people are saying the machlekes is really going on the size. The new the kayavi shura b'mechshcha v'ulei kayavi shura b'mishcha. That the first way we understood of the first machlekes we brought in the name of Rab was when there was a gap. That had nothing to do with the actual size of the sukkah. The next two was the size. One was like 4x4. One said that it has to be the ability to contain your head and most of your body. So that's why we'll say that we're sort of separating it. The first case, we had the first case in the name of Rab. That was saying that the whole argument in Mishnah is when there's a gap, back by himself, and then we're going to separate the other two and put them in their own category that they hold the machlekes is something to do with measurements. We're halfway down in Beis on 2b. Who said it's when the machlekes is only when it's exactly 4x4. Rachanan bar Rabba, that says machlekes is when it's only could contain the head and most of the body. Name of a hechsher sukkah k'mithabi. Maybe they're arguing in the proper measurements of a sukkah. When is a sukkah called kosher? When is a kosher and allowed to be used? The Mar Savar hechsher sukkah bar Amis. Rav Huna said that a sukkah is only kosher if it's Abra Amis. But Umar Savar hechsher sukkah machzekes reish ruba v'shulchanai. However, Rav Chanan held that that the sukkah is when it the proper size of sukkah has to be the amount to contain someone's the person's head and most of Rabbi Shulchanai and most of his. Did I say body the entire time? I was wrong. It's not his body; it's his table. Has to be able to contain his head and most of his table. So like the Kollel hechsher sukkah reish Rabbi Shulchanai. Everyone agrees that a sukkah has to contain the head of the person and most of has to contain the sukkah and most of the table.
First word in the line that you're in right now. Say
Right. And this is machlekes. That this is how we will explain it originally. That what's the machlekes between the two? Very simple. The machlekes between the two is what is machlekes in the Mishnah. One, do we have an argument between Rebbe, between the Rabbanan that say it has to be 20, has to be less than 20 amos, or Buddha says that it could be more than 20 amos. That according to Rav Chanan, Rav Chanan, that if the sukkah is big enough to contain half the table, most of the table, and the person said, then everyone agrees it can be more than 20 amis. If it can only contain that amount, then it's going to be, then it could be, then you have machlekes going to be 20 amis. So now, Omar Savar Baresh Rabbi Shachanai Adal Amis Pligi, Adal Amis, they recall Keshera. But according to Rafuna, it depends if it's 4x4. Until 4x4, then we have machlekes. Once it gets more than 4, the 4 amis, the 4 amis, then we say that everyone will agree you could have a sukkah more than 4 amis. Now, we are going to continue in the machlekes in the Mishnah of Tani Amis. Now we're going to bring down an additional Mishnah that has a similar machlekes. We have a sukkah, and you're going to bring a question from this price. A sukkah, which is more than 20 amis, is possible. That's Rabbanan, same Rabbanan as our Mishnah. But you don't even match at Arba Chamishin. Rabbi Yehuda over here actually says how high it could be. He says it could be higher than 20. If you go up to 45 amis, which is quite high. So Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda wants to bring a proof that to his idea that 20 amis is permissible. Ma'isa b'Hilani Hamalka, Bulud. There's a story with Hilani Hamalka in Lud. Shaisa Sukkah Gavayim Esrim Amma, that her sukkah was higher than 20 amis. But he was a kadim nechnasim v'yetzim l'sham v'loy amru leidavar. That she was Hilani Hamalka was one of the I think she was the husband. Yeah, her husband was Yana, I think. Yana Mel towards the end of the second temple, and she was sitting and she was she followed. She was unlike her husband, I think. She followed the Torah halacha and in every aspect. So she was sitting in the sukkah, higher than 20 amis, and all the rabbis were coming to greet and talk, to greet and talk to the queen over sukkahs, throughout sukkahs. And then you say anything. So Rabbi Yehuda is just figuring out from here that if the rabbis came to sukkah, which is more than 20 amis, and didn't say anything, so it must not be a problem.
Maybe they just didn't want to lose their heads.
Yeah, but okay, we're going to talk about it in a minute. No, we're going to talk about it in a minute. So they say from there's a proof. What do you mean? Isha I don't want your issues. She was a woman. A woman is really patur from a sukkah. So even if she was sitting in a sukkah, which was not valid, the rabbis weren't going to start up with it. It wasn't worth it. Because she had 7 children. She has 7 sons. So if there's 7 sons, the rabbis would have to speak up for the sake of the sons. Everything she did was through the word of the rabbis. So the rabbis would have spoke up. They wouldn't be afraid to speak up. She would listen to them, and she would want. They knew that she would want to go according to halacha. So over here we're going to sort of like there's an extra little piece here with lamali lemisni va'oikol myself. Why need that additional part? Just say that she has 7 children. Why do you say and also she did everything according to the rabbis? Must you say that they were the children were young, so there wasn't a problem. They weren't obligated in the midst of sukkah. In the sukkah, and a katan is part from the sukkah. Even the shiva hayu. It would be impossible since there were 7. Do the math. We'll assume that there were no twins here. So the oldest had to be at least 7 because she has 7 children. And once you're hitting 7, especially then you're hitting into the age of chinuch, when you have to start educating your child. Therefore, the child would have to sit at a proper sukkah. And if you say that a child who has to start being educated is only rabbinic, it's not biblical, and maybe she didn't follow all the rabbinic laws. She followed the biblical laws, not all the rabbinic laws. Therefore, we added. Therefore, everything she did was through the rabbis, and since the rabbis ordained that a child older than 7 or in that age range is supposed to go ahead and fulfill all the mitzvahs as he's supposed to start fulfilling all the mitzvahs because of chinuch and education. Therefore, the rabbis would have told her, or she would have already known, and it wouldn't have happened. Therefore, it's a good proof. The sukkah was more than 20 amas by Hilani Hamalka, and the rabbis didn't say anything. Must be Rabbi Yehuda brings us as a proof. The sukkah more than 20 amas is not a problem. So now, now we're going to say Bishlema Imanda Amar Bishain Defanois Megis Laschach Machlekes. Now, before we go back to Rabbi Yehuda, remember that we had previously 3 ways to understand the machlekes in the Mishnah. What was the machlekes based on? So according to the one that said that there was a gap, the whole machlekes was only when there was a gap. But if there was no gap, everyone would agree to that 20 amis is not a problem. So Sorry, so we have to go plug in the previously we had 3 ways to understand the machlekes, so we have to go plug that in as follows, because we have a machlekes, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Yeah.
Sorry, Rabbi. First word.
We just went to the top of 3a. But I'm just going to explain it.
Okay.
That we have a machlekes over here between Rabbi. We brought down an additional brisa that contains a machlekes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, this machlekes is all this. If Rabbi Yehuda is bringing his whole proof for Hilani Amalka, right? So it has to be that according to the three ways the machlekes is based on either because of the gap, or because of the size of the sukkah, dalit al dalit, 4x4, or because of the right, or the machlekes is only based on when we can't contain most of the head and the shulchan, a small sukkah. So we have to fit it in. So the first one's fine. The first one we said was that there was only when there's a gap. So we have to say, is it normal for this case of Hilani Amalka to have a gap in her sukkah? If it's not normal for it to have a gap in her sukkah, then it doesn't make any sense. Then the whole machlekes, and meaning the sukkah actually reached the schach, the whole argument never started. So this Mishnah would be you wouldn't be able to apply this. There would be no machlekes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan based on and Yehuda would be basing on Hilani Amalka. But don't worry, it's nothing to worry about, because it's normal for a queen to be living in a temporary dwelling where there's a gap between the ceiling and the wall, because it's for the airflow. So therefore, we can plug it in. It's fine. Rabbi Yehuda is bringing a proof from Hilani Amalka. And in such a case, in such a case, and since he's arguing, and since this is the case that he's arguing for Mishnah, it must be Hilani Amalka had a gap in her sukkah. That is his proof that when there's a sukkah, which is 20 amis high, with a gap, is permitted to sit in. And the rabbis said, no. And the rabbis are arguing this specific case of Hilani Amalka. They have a big problem. They have to prove why she was sitting in a pasuk sukkah, or how she was sitting in a pasuk sukkah. However, it could be very well be that the argument between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda is in the case when the sukkah has a gap.
And the gap would have to be less than 3
years. Not necessarily, because we'll learn that the walls could always go. Once the walls start, we say they go straight up. So right, you could have a sukkah. Like the question is, when there's this gap over there, how big could that gap be? So that gap could, as long as you have the proper 10 tefachim, the gap goes up up all the way up. If you ever noticed, there's plenty of sukkahs that are made out of fabric, right? They have fabric walls. And fabric walls aren't necessarily a good wall. So if you look at them, usually they're aluminum structures, right? And the first 10 abayis, they have these strings that create the actual wall, but the wall doesn't go up beyond that, beyond those 10 tefachim, because you say once there's a wall, it goes up to Shemayim. We should definitely we'll learn about. Now, Elamad Namar B'Sukkos Ketana Machlekes. Now, in the other two, that's the whole machlekes between and the whole machlekes in the Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan are only when there is there's a constraint on the space. That's what the whole machlekes was. But if you have a very wide sukkah, it's not a problem. So that means the machlekes in Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, if Rabbi Yehuda is bringing the proof from Hilani Amalka, must be she was sitting in a very small sukkah, a very narrow sukkah. And then the Rabbanan said it wasn't kosher. And Rabbi Yehuda said it was kosher. My proof is from Hilani Amalka sitting in such a sukkah. But we have a problem. If Darka Shalmalka, we're on the second line of Gimel Aleph 3a, Darka Shalmalka Liyashib Sukkah Katana. Is it normal for a queen to sit in a small sukkah? So Amarabba Barbar Ada Loy Nisaka El Sukkah Asri Ketanis Ketanis. There are many small sukkahs. They're each sitting in their own small sukkah. Doesn't make any sense. What is that normal for a queen to be sitting in small sukkahs? No, that she had her own little sukkah. There was one big sukkah, and she had her own little sukkah. So she had her own little narrow sukkah, which is really strange. She had a very small sukkah. It was extremely high, but it was within that constraint of either 4x4, or it was not enough to contain the majority of the table and her head. So Rabbanan Sabri, but now Sukkah. Fine. So the case was like this: that the way he understood it, the way Rabbi Yehuda understood it was that. Let's see the Rabbanan. What the Rabbanan? So we have a problem. So Rabbi Yehuda brought his own answer. The Machlekes, according to a Rav Chanan and Rav Chana and Rav Huna, understand the Mishnah. So the way the Machlekes was the scenario by Helena Malka was that she had her own little sukkah, and that sukkah was very narrow, but was more than 20, and that's when Machlekes took place. But what did the Rabbanan do? So why did the Rabbanan hold? Rabbanan Sabri Binel B'Sukkah Ma'al Yahav Yasvi. That so the problem is, and then so why didn't the rabbi speak up? If they were in a sukkah, if they were in a sukkah, and it was too small. Hold on. So it looks like this. That according to there was a very big sukkah. And she had a very small one for herself for modesty. And her sukkah might have been her little sukkah might have been possible, but we weren't talking about her. So rather, she had her own sukkah. It was for modesty, and therefore we weren't running into. And so we had problems of that. It was normal for a queen to be in a very small sukkah. We said, yeah, it was normal for her to be in a small sukkah. Because of modesty. Rabbanan Sabri B'nei B'Sukkah Ma'al Yahav Yasvi. The Rabbanan held that the children were in a fine sukkah, a kosher sukkah. V'ihi Yashva B'Katinius Mishum Tznius. And she was sitting in a small sukkah because of tznius. Shum Hachi La'Yamri Le'Davar. And therefore they didn't tell her anything. Because really she was sitting in a small sukkah, rather a narrow sukkah. It might have been more than 20 amos. And it might have been a problem due because of its small size. The Rabbanan held since she was sitting there by herself for tznius. Therefore, they said, even though it wasn't kosher, because it was more than 20 amos, and according to Rav Chana and Rav Huna, it was very small. Therefore, that's where the whole machlekes only is applicable anyway. So we found the one case where the whole machlekes would be more than where the machlekes takes place. We found the case Hilling Malka sitting in a small sukkah, very narrow, which according to Rav Chana and Rav Huna, that's where it all takes place. That's where machlekes ever starts to begin with. It was higher than 20 amos. So why didn't the rabbis say anything? Rabbis didn't say anything because she was sitting there by herself. So then what's Rabbi Yehuda's whole proof? If she was sitting there herself, and therefore she's not obligated in the mitzvah sukkah, what was the whole problem to begin with? Why is Rabbi Yehuda bringing this? I found the proof that we found Hilel Malka. She was sitting in the sukkah, and it was very narrow, and it was higher than 20, and still, and the rabbis didn't say anything that was kosher. What do you mean? She was sitting there by herself. It's not a problem. It must have not been a problem because she was sitting there herself, and she's not obligated. Yehuda savar, but now Gaba Haviyasi Afilach Lamrilah. He held that the children were with her. All 7 children were with her. So one of those children must have been over 7. And he would be obligated in the mitzvah of sukkah. And since they did not go ahead, since they didn't say anything, therefore it's going, since they say this must be a proof that she had children of the age of chinuch. They didn't say anything, and they know she would want to teach her children properly. If they didn't say anything, it must be it was kosher. So here she is sitting in a small sukkah, according to Rabbi Yehuda. It was very narrow, it was higher than 20, and they didn't say anything. It must be a proof that it's sukkah higher than 20 in the scenario of Rav Chana and Rav Huna. When it's very small, it's going to be it's okay and it's kosher. Okay, we're going to stop here. That's as far as I prepared, and it's 10 minutes earlier.
That's pretty good. I mean, it's pretty rare we actually get a